Well, hello. Today, this is May 20th, 2021, and my name is André Fauteux. I'm editor and publisher of La Maison du 21e siècle, 21st Century Housing magazine based in Quebec. And today, I'm very pleased to have as a guest R. Blank from Shield Your Body. How are you, R?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Just great. 33 degrees in the sun, an hour north of Montreal today.
I assume that's Celsius.
Celsius, yeah.
Yeah.
It's nearly 100, over 90 Fahrenheit. How is it out west?
It's in the high 80s, lots of wind. So,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah. Hopefully not too many fires this summer, eh? We'll pray.
Yeah, exactly.
So thanks very much. We have a lot to cover today. First, I'd like to just read a little bit about your bio. You're really a fascinating person. But first, I want to ask you, where did the anonymous R come from? Your first name is Ari, right?
That was a nickname my father gave me. He was very
okay.
into crossword puzzles.
We'll talk about Martin in a second. So you're a technologist. I thought you were an engineer by training. Your BA was in what?
My undergrad was in history.
Oh, great.
But then I went into software engineering for a couple of decades.
Uh-huh.
So that's where the engineering comes from, software engineering.
You're not an engineer, though. You studied engineering technology?
Well, I taught at the engineering school at University of Southern California, but again, it was software engineering.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm a history buff myself. My BSc is in political science before I went into journalism.
Oh.
So you describe yourself as an entrepreneur, a technologist, and author. You're CEO of Shield Your Body, which creates products that makes it easy and affordable for people to reduce their exposure to wireless radiation from devices like cell phones and laptops. And this is after a 20-year career in software development for blue-chip firms such as Apple and NBC. And you even created the first video encoder for Flash, which you sold to Google, which is very interesting because I noticed that you wrote an article about the dangers of Google Glass. And that's something you have to talk to me first. But what I want to ask you to start is, why did you leave such a great and prolific career to become an EMF entrepreneur?
Well, it was in the course of writing Overpowered with my father. So for those who don't know, my father was Dr. Martin Blank, and in 2012 he was writing a book. So most of his career, the writing he did was for other academics and scientific journals and so forth. Right. So I'm
showing the French version here, by the way.
It was okay. I wasn't sure if that was it.
By Quebec company. Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
So it doesn't say, but you're co-author of the book.
Yeah.
Overpowered.
So he asked me for some help because the purpose of the book was to communicate his understanding and his experience with EMF and health effects to kind of a broader audience. And that wasn't really his experience in writing. And so he asked for some help and I jumped in and I wrote the book with him. And in the course of writing that book, I came up with the idea of what became Shield Your Body. Mm-hmm. So that's how I made the transition.
So the book was out in 2014. Is that when you left your business?
The book was finished in 2012. I think it was published in 2013. 2013 is also when I launched my first product. But
which was
with the pocket patch.
Okay.
But I was still only doing SYB sort of part-time, and it wasn't until 2016 that I sold my share of my software development company to my partner and went full-time with SYB.
Okay, well, I commend you for doing that because you didn't have to do it. You had a good reason. Tell me a little bit about what your father taught you about science and evidence.
Well, I mean, my father was he was a real believer in science, but part of that is understanding, what science is. Because some people just dismiss science these days. There's a growing number of people who just dismiss science, but other people tend to kind of believe science as though it were just absolute truth.
Yeah.
And it's obviously, it's not untrue and it's not absolute truth. Science, it literally means knowledge. The word science means knowledge. And what science is a process to learn the best possible understanding and explanation of the world around us. And we use the scientific method to test theories, and once we see the results, we come up with explanations. And what is considered true in one generation can be totally overturned by future generations. So it's an evolving body of knowledge that reflects our best, and when I say our, I don't mean individually, I mean collectively, our best way of understanding the world around us. Science doesn't explain everything. Just because something can't be explained by science does not mean it's not true. And as I said just before, something that's considered true by science today could be considered not true by science tomorrow. And an example, I think very relevant to your audience is it was once believed that non-ionizing electromagnetic fields were harmless, were completely benign. But then decades of science and studies have shown that assumption was false.
But of course, the World Health Organization and Health Canada and everyone else says we don't have enough evidence. So they say that Wi-Fi and what have you is all completely safe. Tell us a little bit about your father's claim to fame. He was a professor of physiology, I believe, at Columbia University.
Yeah, he taught in the physiology department at Columbia University Medical School for over 30 years, I believe. And I guess what you consider his claim to fame might not be what I do. So which part of his career are you looking for more detail on?
Well, in the fields of EMFs, he published, I don't have his bio in front of me, but well, it does say here actually over 30 years, but how many publications? He was one of the giants linking EMF, low and high frequency electromagnetic exposure to health effects.
Yeah.
With a female colleague, I believe, one of the
Dr. Reba Goodman. Yeah.
Right.
So that's how he got into EMF. I don't know what he was working on at that time. I know earlier in his career, he'd done a lot of work in surfactants. But he was at Columbia, and he saw a paper published by Dr. Reba Goodman, who became his colleague. Well, she was already a colleague at Columbia, but with whom he subsequently did a lot of his work. And I don't remember which paper of Reba's it was, but it demonstrated bioeffects of exposure to non-ionizing, low levels of non-ionizing EMF. I believe it was in the ELF range. And my father read this paper and he didn't believe it because he had always been taught, and what he was teaching in his classes was that this stuff was benign.
Okay. And
he figured, well, she's, I don't know, literally right down the hall, but she's down the hall. Let me go talk to her. And he went and talked to her. She showed him his data, her data, and that's what led to his interest in this field, because he's like, this looks legit. And so a lot of the work they did together was around something called the cellular stress response. So when your cells encounter a force that your body considers to be harmful, it can release what are known as heat shock proteins. And these heat shock, they're called heat shock proteins because when your body overheats, which is a damaging force, or is exposed to too much heat externally, your cells will release these heat shock proteins. And that's part of what is called the cellular stress response, because your cells are responding to a stressor. And what my father and Dr. Goodman's work showed was that exposure to low levels of non-ionizing EMF radiation triggered this cellular stress response, which showed that the body interprets these forces as harmful, something that needs to be defended against. And that was what a lot of his work was based around, was demonstrating that link at the cellular level, that at the cellular level, our bodies respond to these exposures as stresses, as threats.
reminds me that Ontario toxicologist Magda Havas calls EMF intolerance rapid aging syndrome, because electricity oxidizes us. And the big problem today, of course, is chronic exposure to all this. And Martin was, I'm really sad because I never had a chance to speak to him, actually. I've interviewed dozens of EMF experts over the last 20 years, but to me, besides his science, his publications, one of his claims to fame, of course, is being co-author of the Bioinitiative report and launching the EMF Scientists Appeal, and I think part also of the 5G appeal. Let's talk a little bit about the misinformation out there. Most governments will say the Bioinitiative working group reports are cherry picking. Tell me a little bit about that. Can you rebut that?
Well, so any argument like that is implicitly taking a weight of science approach, weight, W-E-I-G-T, W-E-I-G-H-T. And they're saying, well, there's this many studies that say it's safe and there's this many that say it's harmful. And what that approach or what it obscures is the quality of the underlying science and the funding of the underlying science.
The funding. Mm-hmm.
And so someone can look at it and say it's cherry picked or not. The Bioinitiative report surveyed thousands of studies. I don't know the exact number, particularly given the update. The 2000
report was nearly 2,000, and then they checked another 1,000, I think, for the 2012 report.
Yeah.
And it's ongoing.
And they evaluated studies that showed effect and showed no effect. And they present that in their findings. But this is part of the approach that it's not just that the wireless industry has taken, but that the tobacco industry took before it, which is to try to muddy the waters by funding studies that are designed to show certain results. But when, as my father would say, if there's some studies that show this stuff has no impact, no bioeffects, and there's others that show that it is harmful, that doesn't mean it's safe. That means the mechanisms involved are complicated and not yet fully understood. Now, the mechanisms are better understood today than even when the Bioinitiative report was updated. Mm-hmm. But again, just because there's some studies that show it's safe and some that show it's not, that doesn't mean these forces are safe. It means we don't fully understand the mechanisms involved. It also is illustrative of the corruption of the science. And there's actually an entire chapter in Overpowered, I think it's chapter 9, that talks about the business of science and maps it to what's happening or what's happened with the science of wireless, the science of EMF health effects with the wireless industry to what the tobacco industry had done decades prior.
Well, exactly. Henry Lai did a great study looking at the funding, and he found that 70% of the EMF health studies that were independently financed found health effects or noxious effects, and 70% of the industry funded studies said there were no effects.
Yeah. And Dr. Moskowitz released a paper, I believe in 2012, that evaluated 23 studies into cell phone and tumor risk. And 13 of the lower quality studies found that there was reduced risk. 10 of the higher quality studies found increased tumor risk. And the lower quality studies were funded by the wireless industry, and the higher quality studies were not. So again, this funding bias, funding bias is everywhere in science, and you can see it very clearly in how EMF is studied for its health effects.
Mm-hmm. Why should people be concerned about EMFs, and what are the most noxious forms?
Well,
big question.
So yeah, well. Okay, so there are a lot of toxins in modern society. Anyone who spends 10 minutes thinking about it and looking at it will see there are a lot of toxins in modern society. EMF is one, but it's one that is often overlooked because you can't see it, taste it, smell it, or touch it, right? So it's really easy to ignore. B, it comes off of all of these things that we enjoy so much. And yes, that includes cell phones and smartphones and Netflix, but it also includes refrigerators and light bulbs. And so this is a toxin that's emitted not just by the tech and the digital devices to which many of us are becoming addicted, but also to just the basic underpinning of modern society on which all of us depend.
Everything electric.
Yeah, anything electric. And so there's just an implicit desire to not want to acknowledge this stuff, because you'd be acknowledging that all of this stuff that surrounds us and on which our society depends and on which many of us are addicted, it's a source of these harmful toxins. Now, why should people be concerned is because the science is very strong. This is not really a debated point. People, this is how they fought tobacco for so long as well. But, there's a debate. There's doubt. No, there isn't. There's a very strong body of science here that shows that this stuff is harmful.
For the skeptics, tell me a little bit, summarize the USNTP and Ramazzini findings, please.
Well, the USNTP, different people have different interpretations of that. One thing that's significant is that it did show that there was an increased risk of forming tumors.
Clear risk.
Yes, and that was in their conclusion. But it was also muddied by other factors. Some of the exposed group lived longer than the unexposed group. They used cell phone technology for their study that was quite outdated. Yes, the study found that there was a clear risk of tumor formation as a result of exposure to cell phones, but it's another example of one of these studies that's, in my opinion, that is designed to manufacture doubt and to muddy the water.
Well, yeah, it's the U.S. National Toxicology Program, and they didn't believe in the dangers. Their hypothesis was that there was no risk. And then they said, well, the hypothesis was disproven.
Yeah, but then the lead researcher, I believe, I might be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure, not in the report, but separately when interviewed, said he's not going to carry his phone in his pocket anymore.
Ron Melnick, the designer.
I don't remember the name of the lead
Melnick
researcher.
Designed it, and not just for the record. What the top experts today are saying is that it's a probable or known carcinogen, classified possibly carcinogenic in 2011. And in the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to be upgraded to probable or known carcinogen.
Yes, I've heard the same thing, but we'll see what happens with that. Mm-hmm. But you ask why people should be concerned. And it's because this stuff is all around. The science is very strong that this is harmful, and we can get into some of the why that's so concerning. But the science is very strong. The stuff is everywhere, and there's more and more of it every year because of how the regulations are designed and implemented, which is another thing we could talk about. But there's a lot that you can do to reduce your risk and to reduce your exposure, and that's another, I think, very important message that really needs to be communicated, because if you just communicate that it's harmful and that everything is a source, everything in modern life is a source of it, even if people believe it's harmful, they're going to sort of want to tune it out, because again, like I said, everything in modern life is a source of this stuff.
Yeah, I see two reactions.
I'm sorry?
I see two reactions. People saying, oh, everything gives you cancer and I'm not going to have to, drop all my technologies. Are we going to have to light our houses with candles and stop using technology altogether? That's not the question at all.
Yeah, exactly. So that has to be a key part of the message, in my opinion, which there is a lot that people can do without abandoning technology to really make a difference in their own personal exposure, their family's exposure, and their health risk that comes from that exposure.
Mm-hmm. before we talk about wireless, you do assessments. Your business, you offer assessment services and solutions. How important is it to measure and correct the sources of low frequency 60 hertz?
Sure. So I want to be, we don't directly offer assessments. We offer consulting. It's from a certified building biologist, Kathy Cook, who's also certified as an electromagnetic radiation specialist, also by the Building Biology Institute. But it all happens remotely.
She's a subcontractor of yours? She's not an employee?
Yes. So, and so people can book their sessions with her through the website. Everything happens through Zoom, and people can get their questions answered, anything about EMF protection, EMF testing. And so that's how that works. It's in the consulting section of our website. Now, in terms of testing, I am a huge advocate for testing. We have a lot of, not only do we offer consulting on the testing, but we have a tremendous amount of information on the website about testing, and it's at shieldyourbody.com/test. And we have articles, we have videos, we have a guide that walks people through how to test. We have meter recommendations. And the reason it's so important, I mean, there's certain things you can do to protect yourself without testing, right? And those are the big ones, like don't carry your phone in your pocket, or never talk on the phone up against your head, or turn off your Wi-Fi at night. Things that you can do that you know will cut your exposure, and you don't need any testing to tell you that, because it's obvious and implicit in just how all this technology works. Mm-hmm. But if you're concerned about your exposure, as we said earlier, you know, this stuff is invisible. You can't touch it. You can't taste it. You can't smell it. You have no idea how much there is around you unless you test. And testing can be, you know, like I said, you know, if there's a bunch of phones and a bunch of Wi-Fi routers and a bunch in your room, you know, obviously there's going to be high levels. But once you deal with all that stuff, there could be really high levels from sources you have no idea. And I'll give you an example.
Well, that's why I want to talk just briefly. I'm sorry to cut you off. Before we talk about wireless devices, I was reading Terry Stodin, Stotyn of Kratos Canada, who sells the
dirty electricity filters. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a true filtration system, actually, compared to the filters you plug in. And he was saying, if you don't inspect your home wiring for wiring errors, you can put in all sorts of filters and it won't fix the source of the dirty electricity, which comes in from the grid, from your neighbors, but also everything electronic in and inside and outside your home. So that's why I want to mention those, to first begin with the low frequency measurements and problem solving.
Yes. Yeah, no. So if people, if they don't know already, these different ranges of, the EM spectrum, you need different measuring tools. So to measure the type of radiation that comes from power lines or your electrical wiring, you need a different tool than to measure the type of radiation that comes from your cell phone. And as you were indicating, in terms of dirty electricity, you need even a different meter to really get a gauge on the dirty electricity in your home.
Yeah, it's really with an oscilloscope that you see exactly what's happening. We see here the pure sine wave in red, and all the dirty electricity, thousands of peaks per second, mostly in the kilovolts. And that, I'm told, is the most noxious form of all the EMFs.
Yeah, I find that my sense of things is that you find bioeffects at each part of the EM spectrum. And so the bioeffects might be different, the way it impacts you might be different, but that, you know, my particular perspective on this, and, you know, I'm not a scientist, but I you know, I'm familiar with a lot of the science, is that all of it is harmful, and that you really should be trying to get a gauge on as much of it as possible. And an oscilloscope, you're right. I mean, if you hire a professional to come do an assessment and to help you remediate your issues, they'll bring an oscilloscope. but
Yeah.
most people aren't going to buy one of those for themselves.
No, of
And
course.
yeah, and I'm a big proponent of people getting professional assessments, but those, you need to either live near someone who can do that, or pay for their travel, or wait till they're coming to town. And so I'm a big proponent of people learning how to test for themselves. And the tools you use won't be as precise or as accurate as the ones a professional would bring to your house. But in my experience, they are more than sufficient to really highlight problem areas and to give you the knowledge to take action.
Major, yes, but there's always the risk that your low quality meter, be it for dirty electricity that you plug in to read the dirty electricity, or the RF, radio frequency meters, if they're cheap, they're going to miss out a lot of frequencies. So you think
so I have some in the ebook that I have for download at shieldyourbody.com/test. I make that point that you need to spend at least $160 to get a sufficiently decent. So you can't get away with a cheap meter. A cheap meter, they sell some on Amazon that are $30, and they are worse than useless because they are very misleading.
Yeah.
But if you buy, and there's three meters that I generally recommend. One is a bit more expensive, and it only does RF, and that's the Safe and Sound Pro from Safe Living Technologies up kind of in your part of the world. Yeah. And then, and that's my number one meter recommendation. But I also recommend the Trifield TF2 and the Cornet ED88T Plus, both of which you can get for under $200 and give you reasonably accurate measurements in the ELF and RF range of the spectrum. And that is going to be able to show you the radiation from things like cell phone wireless and Wi-Fi and all that tech in your house or in your neighbor's house.
They'll cover most of the stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and then the ELF will be able to help illuminate some of the problem areas that you might have due to the wiring or some appliances that might just shock you. And this was actually what I was going to say before in terms of just how once you start testing, you can be shocked at what you'll find. I was renting a house a few months ago. And just for fun, I took out my Trifield because I was traveling with my Trifield. And I was measuring around and I saw these massive levels of electrical radiation. So that's low frequency electrical coming from the entertainment center, it turned out. And so I took my meter around the entertainment center and it turned out to be a DVD player. Which who would even use that anymore? But I mean, the house didn't even have any DVDs in it, but it was plugged into the entertainment center. And I mean, I don't remember the actual numbers. I just remember these were higher than anything I'd ever measured myself before. And I just unplugged the DVD player and those levels just went away. Wow. And I would never have thought, without a meter, I would never have thought that, I should unplug this DVD player because that would be an insane amount of radiation coming from it.
So that's simply because it's not grounded. It's a two-prong plug and the cord is not shielded, right?
I didn't diagnose it. I just unplugged it.
Good idea.
Yeah.
And people spend so much time under 3 feet from these wires that emit all the time.
And so you just can't know. Again, there's the obvious things that you can do to protect yourself, like putting your phone into airplane mode when you're not using it, things like that. But beyond that, there's so much that you can't know. There could be a part of your living room that has very high levels due to whatever reason. Maybe your neighbor has a circuit breaker or the wiring behind the wall is weird there. And then just a few feet away in the same living room, the levels are much safer. And so you could just move your couch a few feet and be much safer, but you would never know that unless you had a meter and did the testing.
Exactly, especially your bed.
Where you spend so much of your time, especially, where your head is on your bed is particularly important. Yeah.
Tell me, I imagine you made a lot of money selling your Flash application to Google. And then I read about your Google Glass article. Tell us about all these wearables that we wear on our body.
Well, fortunately, Google Glass was a failure, but it looks like more are coming. There's rumors that Apple is developing wearable glasses. And yeah, I got to be a beta tester on Google Glass, and I don't remember, this must have been 2013. And I actually got in. The way you got to be a beta tester was you had to tweet what you would do if you were a beta tester. And I actually I don't remember the exact wording, but I tweeted, I want to be a beta tester so I could measure the RF levels. And they let me in.
Really?
So, yeah.
Wow. I thought that it would move you to the side. Yeah.
And I did write an ebook at the time. I don't remember all the detailed findings, but I have it handy somewhere but it's almost 10 years ago that I did this. So, but I have it somewhere on my hard drive. I could find it. But I found that the levels under certain use cases were quite high. And the problem with something like that, actually, I have a video somewhere up on YouTube of, because it got so hot when you were doing certain things with Google Glass, the device itself got so hot, and it's touching your temples. And so I did a little video actually of cooking egg. So I got the Google Glass to be hot enough where I could cook egg on it. And that just showed you how hot it got, because, you know, when you're cooking egg, you're transforming proteins, you know, the same stuff that your body is made out of.
Whoa.
So
people wear these for 12 hours a day? Or
that's the problem. I mean, that's what makes it such a problem, is the length of time, the duration that these products are designed to be used, and the way in the way directly on your body. And when it comes to something like glasses, as opposed to a watch, you know, it's right next to your brain, it's right next to your eye, and the eye is incredibly vulnerable to this type of stuff. And there's parts of your head where there's no natural skull shielding, your brain. And again, you're talking about really long exposures. This is a big problem. So fortunately, like I said, Google Glass didn't become a thing, and there probably will be more products like it in the future. But right now, the problem it's not considered to be a wearable because it's not a fancy new type of tech, but these AirPods and other Bluetooth headsets, where, I mean, like I say, it's not called a wearable because wearables are supposed to be fancier, higher tech, but it's a wireless headset. And even before the AirPods, you know, for quite some time, you'd see these people walking around with their Bluetooth earpiece on for just hours at a time, and really bringing them no benefit, except for that when they get a call, they could feel like they're living in the future and just tap their ear and answer the call. Like, hey, Scotty, beam me up, you know, that kind of thing. And yes, Bluetooth emits less power than a cell phone or than Wi-Fi, but it still emits power at levels where we have science showing that there's negative health outcomes. And again, it's the exposure of the duration of the exposure is really important, because we know that there is a dose response relationship between exposure and health risk. And so when you're going around for hours at a time, several days a week or every day with this stuff in such close proximity to your brain, people need to understand, this is part of, I'm sure your audience knows this, but I just like saying it all the time, because sometimes people just need to be reminded of this fact, which is this stuff, it's all released without any long-term testing. No one sat someone down in a lab for 10 years with AirPods and measured what the health effects were, because A, that type of study would be pretty unethical, but B, that's just not how this stuff is done. The reality, the world, consumers, we are the test subjects. It's going to be in 10 years and in 20 years that we start to learn what the effects of this stuff is, because it's all released without any long-term testing into what the health effects are.
You are the guinea pig.
Yes.
And we see on the BioInitiative, Cindy Sage's color, these tables here showing how minute exposures can have adverse neurological, cardio, and cancerous. And so it's not the level of the exposure, the duration also.
Yeah.
Major factor. I see that we're both wearing antennas in front of our eyes. Metal spectacles.
I do it to look smart.
And, Dr.
Yeah.
Bill Ray, I don't know if you ever talked to Dr. Bill Ray, the cardiothoracic surgeon who founded the Environmental Health Center in Dallas, who became chemically and electrically sensitive, and told me, Andre, I'm guilty because I put so many metal implants in my patients for years as a cardiothoracic surgeon. And he told me one of the things you want to do is get rid of those glasses. So in the last year, I've been saying I have to change my glasses. Are you more sensitive to electricity than the common?
So no, I wouldn't say that I am.
Okay.
I never thought of myself as sensitive until last year, and it was during COVID lockdown, and I was staying in a city which I haven't lived in like a real city. You and I were talking beforehand, and I had lived in LA for 10 years. I lived in Venice. Yes, that's technically a city, but it's not really a city. Like when I lived in New York City, in Manhattan for 7 years. That's a real kind of urban place where the buildings are tall, your neighbors are all packed together. And so it just happened when COVID hit and lockdown happened, I was staying in a city, and the lockdown was pretty severe, much more so because I was traveling, and much more severe than in the US. And I started not being able to sleep. And when I say, it wasn't like insomnia, it was just
Jitters?
like the sleep wasn't restful in any meaningful way. And I would wake up multiple times in the night.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there were other stressors, given that the world was in the state that it was in.
Yeah.
And not being able to go outside, but it really, and so I didn't have a dirty electricity meter with me. I suspect that was actually a part of it, but there were very high readings right outside on the balcony. And I looked around, and there weren't any towers on the building itself, but I could see about 10 towers just within eyesight of my balcony. And I was getting readings that were equivalent if I just had a cell phone. If I was measuring off of a cell phone, I was getting readings like that just outside on the balcony. And that was the first time in my life I started to really feel like I was more sensitive than I had previously thought. But it's my view that everyone is electrosensitive, and that's based off of my understanding of the science, and also my understanding of how people just justify and compartmentalize their experiences. So if you're having increased anxiety, you might not even realize it. And when you do start to realize it, you might think, oh, it's my job, or, oh, I'm just not sleeping well, or I need to sleep better. And so there are all these conditions that people have that they're just not necessarily going to attribute to, I have too much EMF in my life. And these conditions are quite common. I mean, insomnia alone is a massively widespread condition.
It's an epidemic.
Yeah, and anxiety and depression are more common now than they have, at least in the United States, more common now than they have ever been. And again, there could be multiple factors, and it's hard to isolate, but I really do, based off of my understanding of the science, and again, like I said, my understanding of just how people think about their health and their conditions, I believe that almost everybody, if not everybody, is electrosensitive. There are some people who are very or much more electrosensitive, whether due to their inherent physiologies or their exposure to other toxins that act, to suppress their natural defenses and resilience. And so that's how I view electrosensitivity.
Yeah, obviously the science is clear. We're all electric, and 2 to 3% of people cannot function, cannot work or live in modern society where all this pollution is ubiquitous. How do you say?
Ubiquitous.
It's there all the time. It's there all the time. And I was asked, I've been writing about chemical and electrical sensitivities for 20, 30 years. And a lot of people think I'm electrosensitive. And I always said, no, I'm not. But I wash myself with Varsol, paint thinner as a student painter. I got concussions, a mouthful of mercury, amalgams, and mold and pesticide exposure. Everything that Dr. Ray told me can be triggers of these hypersensitivities. And Dr. Havis again, Magda Havis, found that yes, 2 to 3% of people are extremely sick, but up to a third of people react more than others to electricity.
Yeah.
And in Europe, several surveys in many countries, it's 10% of people who have found there is their well-being is affected, and the trick is just to unplug and see how better you feel. They've done it with the autistic kids. Dr. Gelter in the US has a protocol, unplug for 2 weeks or 1 week or just at night, and they see amazing results. Would you like to share maybe a story from one of your clients, how they've improved?
Oh, well, I mean, so, I mean, there's some people, so at Shield Your Body, we have just a lot of information. And so people don't need to become paying customers in order to benefit from what we provide. And so, I mean, a lot of the anecdotes are very simple, but I think show just how powerful just basic changes can be. So one, I remember a woman, this one's actually, it hit me so hard. And again, it's quite simple. I don't mean to over dramatize it, but it was impactful on me. So I included it actually on the story on the homepage. But there was this woman, and she didn't have really any money to spend, but she wanted to learn, you know, how, and she found our site through a Google search. She found one of the posts that we have about turning off your Wi-Fi at night. And she just started doing it. And she suddenly could sleep through the night for the first time in years. And she emailed me and she thanked me profusely. She's like, I didn't have any money, you know, because EMF protection, I try to make it affordable as I can, given, you know, that a lot of these raw materials are incredibly expensive, and none of our businesses operate at kind of massive scale. We're all small businesses, so we can't get the cost down through scale. So I try to keep things as affordable as possible, but this stuff isn't, you know, cheap. And for a lot of people, it's not practical to just EMF proof their life with EMF protection products. And so when she discovered there were ways that she could make that type of difference. And so she emailed me thanking me. She also said she was going to go through more of the website and learn more of the ways that she could cut her exposure like that, because she saw how powerful that was. Then, you know, one of the products we have, after I just tell you how affordable all my products are, last year we added a bed canopy, and EMF bed canopies are expensive. Because they require, ours is made of silver, and it's a bed canopy, so it's a lot of silver. But that is the product where we have had the most positive feedback, because, and this is the reason, because all of my products, until we did the bed canopy, all of my products are under $100. Most are under $40. But more and more, as we started hearing from customers worried about 5G, worried about the 5G towers, I started realizing, a lot of my products that I've designed over the years are really about protecting you from sources that are in your control. And what I mean by that is like the phone pouch. That's designed to make it safer to carry your phone. And ideally, you're not carrying your phone in your pocket, or if you are, it's in airplane mode. But there's some people, for whatever reason, they need to carry their phone in their pocket, or they refuse to change their behavior. So a product like the phone pouch is designed to make it safer to do that. Same with the laptop pad. You should never use your laptop in your lap, but there are people who still do, and that's why the laptop pad exists. So a lot of my products exist to help protect you against sources of EMF that are already in your control. But I realized, we need more products to protect people from sources of EMF that are not in their control. You can't control how far away you are from the cell tower that has gone. You can't control how many of your neighbors have Wi-Fi or make them turn it off at night. And so the bed canopy was really the first product. It's still the only product in my catalog that can really provide powerful protection from so many different sources that are outside of your control. And it can do it for an extended period of time, right? Because it's all night. It's 8 hours-ish, give or take, depending on how much you sleep. And it's full 360-degree protection. So it is such a powerful product that is one where people tell us, they email in and they say, I can't believe how much better I'm sleeping. I wake up, I have energy. I'm sleeping through the night. I wake up, I have energy. I'm really glad I did that.
Yeah, the canopy is really great. It's also available in Canada from slt.co.
Mm-hmm.
Because it can get pretty complicated if you have to paint your house with black carbon paint, right?
Yeah, it's so whole home EMF shielding is possible. If that's something that people want to do, I always strongly recommend they hire an expert, a remediation expert, someone like a building biologist with an EMR, an electromagnetic radiation specialization, because it's very expensive, so you don't want to have to redo it. B, it's very easy to get wrong. If you do it even a little bit wrong, it can have very negative, like if you leave a little gap and some is getting in, it can lead to increased exposures for you.
Hot
It
spots.
also requires a change of lifestyle, because you can't have, once you EMF proof your house, you really can't have sources of EMF inside of your house.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very expensive and it's very difficult. If it's something that people want to do, I strongly recommend getting a consultant to help you with it. But in my view, it's impractical for most people because of what I was saying.
Yeah, in Montreal, the local building biologist says he's not, when people need to paint, he won't paint all 4 sides of the house, but maybe the major wall where it's coming in, so it doesn't reflect everywhere and create hot spots.
Yeah, that's smart.
Time is of the essence. It's really flying. Tell us about 5G, why it's really a concern.
Well, there's a lot of, I think you read my email about this week, because I'm just starting on a new content series now. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people are concerned with 5G, because it is a new technology. It's a new set of frequencies, and to support the network, it requires a deployment of a whole new set of hardware, in effect. None of this stuff has been tested. But to me, and that's all that, it should worry people that this stuff is deployed without testing. But to me, what's most worrisome about 5G is that we've already seen over the past 20 years in particular, just an exponential growth, continued exponential growth in the number of sources of EMF in our lives, right? Because 20 years ago, I'm trying to think, 20 years ago, I did have a cell phone, but I had just gotten it. It was my very first one. And I didn't have Wi-Fi anywhere. Everything, I remember at home and at work, I had Ethernet cables. So I had a cell phone, but it was, my first one. There was no Wi-Fi anywhere. The number of cell towers around, and I didn't have any smart devices, and gradually over the last 20 years, that just keeps exploding, right? So more people get cell phones. That requires more cell towers. Wi-Fi gets deployed. That means there's more Wi-Fi networks everywhere. With more Wi-Fi networks, you have more devices connecting to those Wi-Fi networks. Then you get, smart speakers and smart thermostats and smart refrigerators, all of this. And what's happened as a result, A, people have gotten used to that, but B, the networks have gotten clogged because there are so many devices sending so much information that it's really preventing for future development. And you really hear these complaints coming out of smart cars, because smart cars, especially the ones that require fully autonomous driving, require massive amounts of data transmission in order to be able to do that type of function. And so what they've done with 5G, because people think of it as a cell phone technology, which, it is a cell phone technology, but it was designed from the ground up to support an exponentially larger number of nodes on the network. So meaning more of these smart devices, more smart cars, and more data being transferred between all of these nodes on the network. So what 5G is laying the groundwork for is even from where we are now, which has already been an explosion from where we were 20 years ago. It's the next set of exponential growth in the number of sources of this type of radiation in our lives. And that's why, that's where I think the riskiest threat of 5G comes from that. It's not that it is a new set of frequencies or that it, you know, it has beam forming instead of the older 4G. Again, that's all worrisome and it does present risks. But to me, the biggest risk is that it has set the path for another round of at least a decade of exponential growth in the number of sources of exposure. And because each of these exposures adds to our cumulative health risk. And so the more of them that we are exposed to, right, the more our personal health risk increases.
Yeah, and the 3 and 4G technologies are going to stay, of course, but people have to understand with 5G, it's higher frequency, shorter wavelengths, so they need more power because they're not as penetrating. So you're winding up with little antennas in front of your house, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And increasingly, they're going to be not just in your house, they're going to be in your car.
In your house even, yeah.
Yeah.
A building biologist told me there's architects who are hiding Wi-Fi transmitters behind drywall. So you don't even know it's there and it's cooking you. Your head
seems
may
like
be
that's going to be hard
it.
to maintain. But
Yeah.
if it needs repair, you're
Insane.
SOL. Yeah.
And people don't realize with these millimeter waves, they call them, the higher frequencies from 5G, there's only about 100 studies that exist, but they're really worrisome and they're from the Russian military. How did you learn to speak Russian, by the way? By going to school?
I studied it in school, yeah.
Why?
Because it was one of the languages offered. And, I thought I would take Russian, and then I ended up studying in Russia for a bit too. And
you did. I have to put you in touch with Grigoriev. Are you in touch with?
No, I'm not. My Russian is quite rusty.
Well, I exchanged English emails with Oleg Grigoriev, who's the new head of the Russian Radio Protection Agency.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Really nice guy.
But yeah, my experience with Russian and the former Soviet Union goes back. I can't believe how old it makes me sound, but to the mid-90s. So
you're really an old man.
Yeah, I'm getting on in years.
Also, 5G is the fact that you're saying that the Internet of Things is coming. People don't realize that on their smart meter, there are 2 antennas. Only the first one, the 900 megahertz, is activated. I'm not sure if they've begun in your area activating the Wi-Fi 2.4 gigahertz Zigbee antenna. That's the one that's going to be talking to our appliances. So to reduce your exposure to 5G technology or radiation is choosing the opt-out, the non-communicating meter.
Yeah.
Ways.
If possible, you know, it depends where you live, what the options they'll even give you. Mm-hmm. So, you know, definitely explore it. If they allow you to opt out, then you should opt out. I mean, I'm of the opinion that people should opt out of any EMF emitting tech that doesn't give them sufficient value to justify the cost to their health. And yes, 5G is, you know, don't upgrade to 5, but that also means if you don't need a smart fridge, and I literally do not know one single person who needs a smart fridge.
No, they're creating.
So don't get a smart fridge, whether it's 5G or not 5G, don't get a smart fridge. Don't get an Alexa. Don't get a Google Nest. You just don't need this stuff. You know, there's certain tech. As you said at the start of this, you know, I have a long career in technology. I am not anti-technology. I am very pro-tech. I recognize the tremendous value that so much technology has created for us individually and for us as a society. But as we evaluate our own purchase decisions today and the behaviors with technology today, you really have to think, like, do I need this or do I just think it's cool?
Well, you have to realize it's the drop in the bucket that makes the barrel overflow. I have a couple of friends who love their Alexa, and when we have parties in their yard, we each have our tables and keep a distance, you know, and we love to, you know, play me some Led Zeppelin, and we think it's really funny. But these people are getting zapped 24 hours a day.
Yeah, they could just turn it on for the party, but that's not how they're doing it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was telling you, people were asking me if I was hypersensitive, and I found a few years ago that I am, very rarely because I have no wireless in my house, but I gave a course for 3 hours with 2 wireless headsets because they were filming me. And after 3 hours, I sat down for lunch with my friend, the building biologist, Stefan Bielinski, And it was like I had a sunburn on my cheeks. And another time I was shielding 2 smart meters in a post office for my friend who worked there. And I felt 2 like pins hitting in my head. And most recently, my cable company turned on the Wi-Fi in my modem by mistake. They had a problem and they shut it off and turned it back on, and they didn't read my file saying no Wi-Fi. I'm sitting 3 feet from this thing. So for a week, I had problems sleeping and headaches, which I never have. I sleep like a baby. I'm in great health. And after a week, I pulled out my safe and sound meter, and I was being cooked. So my message is radiation you don't need. You know, if I go in a hotel for Wi-Fi for an hour or 2, no problem. But in my house, I want 0 wireless.
Yeah. Where you spend the most amount of time. Yeah, it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm. In closing, what would you like to share in conclusion?
Well, I should have something ready for that question. You know, people really need to realize, and again, you know, I'm sure your audience already does, but they can make a really big difference in their personal exposures and in their personal health risks from this stuff, just by changing some of their behaviors. And you don't have to give up tech. And you certainly, there's really no value in getting terrorized or afraid or overwhelmed when, you know, because a lot of people who get in touch with Shield Your Body, EMF is a new subject for them. And they're starting to get terrified. And you know, don't get terrified. You have power, even as the number of sources are exploding everywhere. And people like me are trying to advocate, you know, awareness of this stuff. Don't get terrified. Realize you do have power, and you know, just learn I call it actually came from my father, the 2 key rules of EMF protection, which is minimize your use of EMF tech, EMF emitting technology, and 2 is to maximize the distance between your body and that technology when it's in use. And there are a lot of different ways you can do that. You know, I said, don't carry your phone in your pocket, turn off your Wi-Fi at night. There's a lot of ways, and we list a lot of them at shieldyourbody.com in the guide that people can download on the front page. But there's a lot of these things that you can do. You don't have to do all of them. You don't have to feel like you have to completely eliminate EMF from your life for most people, but you can really exert control over this and reduce your exposures and improve your health. And it's all just, it's all within your reach.
And how do you convince your spouse, your family, your friends that they should protect themselves also and protect you? Scaring them it really doesn't work.
No, scaring them doesn't work. And I actually have a set of content, an ebook, a couple of ebooks and some videos specifically for people to try to help them learn to communicate this stuff to others. And that's also available on my website. That's shieldyourbody.com/advocacy. And it's because, like you're just saying, you know, that is a separate but related challenge, which is, you know, once you become aware and you want to start making these changes, how do you get your spouse to make these changes? How do you start talking about this to your boss at work in terms of where they're putting the Wi-Fi router, what technology they're upgrading to? And so there are ways that nothing is guaranteed in terms of outcomes, but there are more effective ways of approaching those types of conversations.
R. Blank, CEO of Shield Your Body. You're a gentleman and a scholar and a great communicator. It was really a pleasure sharing an hour with you, and we have to do this again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, keep in touch. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.